Today we're going to be talking about Jesus feeding the 5,000, and it's found in Matthew 14, verses 13 to 21. And we're going to start by reading verses 14 to 16. And when Jesus went out, he saw a great multitude, and he was moved with compassion for them, and healed their sick. When it was evening, his disciples came to him, saying, "This is a deserted place, and the hour is already late. Send the multitudes away, that they may go into the villages and buy themselves food." But Jesus said to them, "They do not need to go away. You give them something to eat." So in verse 14, we see again that Jesus had compassion on the people that he saw. He saw that they were lost. They did not have his salvation that he offers to them through faith alone. And he was moved with compassion for them, and he wanted to do something about it. We talked about this before, how he didn't just feel the weight of sin, and he just didn't feel sorry for them, but he also did something about it, and he did all that he could by him healing and him teaching to show them the way of salvation. And we know that since he is God, he can do anything, and he is the one who grants us salvation. So with us, we should be doing all that we can. We can't save them, but Jesus can, and he's the one who brings salvation. But we should be following his example to do all we can to show that compassion to others, and not just to feel it, but to do something about it. And in verse 15, it says that it was evening, and his disciples came to them, and it was a late time. So Jesus was thinking about sending them back to their house to get food. The disciples were coming to him saying, "This is a deserted place, and the hour is already late. Send the multitudes away." So they were saying that they should go home and go to eat. And that's what the disciples wanted. But Jesus says that they did not need to go away, and that they would provide something. Because Jesus says in verse 16 that they did not need to go away, but that we would give them something. So Jesus didn't want them to leave the teaching. He saw the importance of teaching over the physical needs, that it was more important the spiritual food that they were going to get than the physical food. And he says that he's going to provide something for them. And in verse 17 we read, "And they said to him, 'We have here only 5 loaves and 2 fish.'" So the disciples were worried. They're like, "Where are we going to get all this food?" And they say, "We only have 5 loaves and 2 fish." And these loaves weren't supersized. They weren't some huge meal. They were exactly what they say, 5 loaves and 2 fish. They weren't big. And to feed 5,000 men, we know that there was women and children along, so they just counted the men. So there's probably over 10,000 people here that they'd have to feed. And they're like, "We only have 5 loaves and 2 fish." And Jesus doesn't seem to be surprised or too worried about it, that he only needs a few things to do miracles with. He doesn't need anything, but he does use the human means while he was here on this earth. And in verse 18 to 21, it says, he said, "Bring them here to me." Then he commanded the multitudes to sit down on the grass, and he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish and looked up to heaven. He blessed and broke and gave the loaves to the disciples, and the disciples gave to the multitudes. So they all ate and were filled, and they took up 12 basketfuls of the fragments that remained. Now those who had eaten were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. So here he says, bring the fish and the loaves to me. That's not a big deal. And he commanded the multitude to sit down. He's like, "Chill out, guys. I got this." And they sit down, and Jesus looks into heaven, and that shows that he was realizing that the gift of the food came from heaven, and what he was going to do through it was from heaven. It wasn't about the human means that brought it about. It was about God, because we know that the food is God's. It comes from God. Every gift comes from God. And he provides the increase too. He provides the miracle through it. It says that he looked up to heaven and he blessed and broke it. So he prayed over it. Even Jesus prayed. He didn't absolutely need to because he was God, but as a human, he limited his powers. He was not all-knowing at times because he limited his own knowledge. But that does not mean that he was not God. So he had perfect communion with God through prayer, and he had the Holy Spirit living inside him fully, and he lived a perfect life, we know. So he was praying for strength, and he was praying to do God's will, and he was never denied what he prayed for according to God's will. So he prayed that this would be increased, and says that it did actually turn into, not turned into, but it just kept coming and coming and coming. That they distributed this fish and loaves, and it just kept going. It never emptied. It was like an endless buffet. And it says that they gave to the multitudes, and they all ate and were all filled. Now, it doesn't say that they just had a little bit and they had a snack and they were still hungry, but they were filled, it says. So they had even more than they wanted. And they even had 12 baskets extra left over. So they got even more back than what they had at the beginning. And this shows that God does provide, and it was through Christ's prayer, through Christ's power, that he brought it about. And it says that it was 5,000 men, and there was more children and women, because it says besides women and children. So it wasn't just a little bit of people, and it wasn't exaggerated. So this miracle is a very, very well-known miracle in Jesus' ministry. What should we learn about God through this? What should we apply it to our lives? And we need to remember that nothing is too big for God. Even though Jesus only had just a little bit of food, it was more than enough to feed the 5,000 men there, and to not only feed them, but to fill them, and also to have extras. So we can see from this that he not only provides, but he also gives extra blessing wherever he's working. So if we're doing his will, he will provide not only what you need, but more than that, so that you are able to do his will. And remember that Christ is not about feeding your stomach. He's not about feeding you physically, but he is about feeding your soul, is the primary goal of God. Because he said that the purpose of it was so that they would not have to go home and eat and lose that time of teaching. Jesus provides their needs, because he does care for their needs, but that's not his primary goal. It is their spiritual needs that he provides, and we should trust God in our physical needs and also our spiritual needs and use it for his glory.